We're going to paint a very loosely painted rose today. So this is the basic image, pink rose. And I'm going to use a little bit of cling wrap because it's fun to try something different. And I like the rose petals are very smooth and soft. And so I like the idea of having some texture in the background. So I have on my mixing plate a few different colors of green, a hooker green, a cascade, an emerald, an olive, and I have some manganese blue here, and some ultramarine blue. And the manganese blue and the ultramarine blue are both granulating, so that'll give some interesting texture when we use the cling wrap. Now, what I'm planning to do is tilt this board just a little bit, because I don't want the colors to go into the rose. So I'm tilting it so that it's sloped downward. And I'm putting on some water. It's slightly got some of that blue and green in it because it's been used to wet the paints and put them on the mixing tray, which is just a dish actually. But anyway, the slight tint from the paint. Slight tint from the paint lets you see it a little bit better anyway than if I just put the clear water on. So what I want to do is just put some greens in and different tones of greens, emerald, hooker, mixing them a bit. This is the ultramarine blue, and with some green in it, some manganese blue. And I'm just putting these colors in the water, keeping them away from the rose so that they won't affect the work we're going to be doing on the rose. And they'll also leave this way a nice kind of space around the rose of light, which I'm actually softening here. And then I'm just going to take some small bits of a cling wrap. This is one that I bought in Zambia when I was working there 2 years ago. So it's called Total Home. And I just put this cling wrap on here, and I move it around so I get a certain amount of design. And when it dries, it'll create an interesting pattern that will be easy to work with for making the impression that this is, there are leaves and a garden scene back here. So they'll be different. I'll just move this around a little bit more until I get enough separate, different shapes. Yeah, and then that will be left so that we can work on the rose while that is drying, because that does take a fair amount of time to dry under the plastic. So let's see, just have to get it just about right. And then after it dries and leaves a pattern of texture, I will come in and brush stroke around it until we have it looking the way we want. And then I'm just going to do the same thing by putting this little paper towel roll under this side. And I've already dabbed this nicely so that nothing should come into my rose by tilting it. And I'm going to do the same thing down here on the other side of the rose. I think you can see the whole paper, yeah. So it's tilted now the other way. Just a little, just the roll of paper towels, just about the right size to get that tilted. I don't want it on an easel, which would be much more tilted than I really want it to be. And I'm only tilting it for the purpose of making sure that I'm keeping the paint away from the rose, because I want to be able to start working on that right away without worrying about whether the paper there in the rose area is dry enough. So I'm just going to do the same thing. I don't want these colors to be too dark, but I want them varied. And I do have some granulating paints in here that will make interesting granulation in addition to the pattern that the cling wrap or saran wrap, however we want to call it, total home in Zambia. Yeah. I was there working on I was the technical leader of doing a plan for the capital city on waste management. So I spent 4 months a year there for 2 years, up until I was there in 2018 and 2019. Okay, I'm going to begin this next phase. I've taken off the cling wrap, and we'll just leave that till the end of the painting to see where we might want to add some different color. And what I'm going to do is start with a very light, very, very light amount of water on this side, because this is the side. Unfortunately, you are looking at the painting from the side, but it fits in with the frame better. So it's filling the whole frame on this side. So what I'm going to do is just put some water on here, on this side, and bring in a very, very light bit of pink and just drop it in. And mostly dropping it in near the base of the petal. Okay, but still having some color come in to the outer part of the petal. And this is just a very, very light, what I'm using is an opera rose, but it can be a very light rose. It can be a quinacridone rose or a permanent rose. As long as it's mixed with a lot of water. And as you can see, I'm dropping it in a little bit more at the base, but I'm pulling it out and just letting it spread around. Then as I go over here, there'll be some areas where I'm also wanting to have the light rose, so I'll just drop some in here and there. And then I'm going to take my paper towel and on some of those edges, I'm just going to dab the color out. So lift it with the paper towel, a small amount of, just kind of squeeze up the paper towel and lift some of that out. Okay, you see, just taking the paper towel and lifting some color out softly on the edges where it would be, where the light would be hitting it. Then I'm going to mix together a rose that is a little more intense. Could be the same color, but just a little less water. Or it could be a slightly different color that's just a little darker rose, depending on what you have on your palette. So I'm mixing together a normal quinacridone rose with a little bit of rose madder. And I'm going to go into some of these wet areas over here and just drop in some color in the same way, just a little bit more color, and spread some of that out in the water softly. So I'm just using a soft, this is a number 12. I think it's a Raphael, and it is, can't read. Yeah, it's a Kalinsky sable. That's what it feels like because it really bends and is very soft. And on some of these outer edges here, I'm going to indicate that there's some pink color in those edges. Got to get just the right amount of water and paint so it's not too dark, not too light. And just spread it. So we're practicing the very loose application of the paint. Very watery, very transparent and loose with some lost edges. And some lifting here and there. And you remember that we left some white so that the other color, the green, wouldn't be too close, but also so that there could be a glow near the flower. And in the same way, we can have some of the flower color transition into the green. I can take my little magic eraser, and here's a sharp edge here that I don't want, and just scrub that out a little bit. There's a sharp edge that I don't want either. Again, that has no nothing in it except abrasion ability. So it's just the Mr. Clean Magic Eraser without any suds added. But already we're starting to see a little bit of the emergence of this flower with very little detail added deliberately. Just a soft glow and a little bit of indication of shadow, but not too much. Got a little more. Now there's an area in the center where it's a little more scarlet, a little more orangey. So I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow and orange and red, scarlet. Get some orange for this area in the center. But first I'm going to put a little bit more water back in here because it's already dried. And we need it wet. Not too wet, just a little bit wet. So I dried the brush a little bit more in. So let's put a little bit of color in there. And if you look carefully at your photograph and the painting that was done already, you can see some of this color, this more warm orange color in the center. So we're just dropping that in. And in some places we're letting it diffuse, and in other places we're moving it around and showing some definition to it. Okay. And go back and get a little more pink and put some of that pink in here next to the orange. Make the orange pop. Blend it a little bit here and there. Okay, so I'm just looking now to see where I might want to make sure that I've got some light highlights, and just using my paper towel to dab some of those areas so that it's indicating some light. I think you can start to see the beginning of a flower. Let me just zoom in a little bit so you can start to see that. There, I'll zoom out. And while it's still wet, I'll take a little smaller brush and take some nice bright red and put some of that, for example, in some of the shadow areas. I'm just going to drop it in a little bit in the shadow areas. Now sometimes people will use a Q-tip. Sorry. But I kind of like the paper towel. It's fine. But you can, if you want to be more careful, use a Q-tip in some of these areas. Now here, this area here is in shadow, so we just soft. And the nice thing is, because we're doing wet on wet, this is wet on wet, it is creating a very diffused shadow. Okay? Beginning of a shadow. And then we can come in later and have more definition. But for now it's And down here where this petal curves down, we might want to put a little more of that petal definition that is coming down in this way. Put a little bit of definition inside some of this inner petal in the center. It's a little too wet still to do much there, but we can put a little bit here and under here to start to define that petal. And we're just going real easy. We don't want to, because this is going to be a very loose rose painting. We want it to have a very light touch with it. Over here, there's quite a bit of shadow, so we can put some of that color here. And it's wet enough that it's moving into the lighter areas, creating a soft transition of color. And up here, there's an upper edge to the flower where it bends, and there's some color here. And then we'll bring it softly into the rest of the petal, but lightly with just water. So what we're doing is we're slowly giving some shape to the flower with this very, very soft gradation of colors. Some are a little more dark pink, and some are a little more red, and some are a little more orange. And in between adding color, we sometimes blend it and move it around with a little bit of damp brush. I'm going to put a little bit down here as the petal turns and moves downward as it goes into shadow a little bit. And I used the orange tone, and then I'm going to use a little bit more red tone. Just drop the color in and let it diffuse to create a sense of the edge of the petal. Here also, just a little bit of edge, not too much, just letting it diffuse into the rest of the rose. And then some shadow under that petal there, negative painting around that petal, and then blending it. And then lifting where it has gone into the side petal a little too much, lifting with a dry, removing all the water from the brush with your paper towel, squeezing it out, then lifting. Sometimes people have two brushes in their hand all the time. One brush, and they change them constantly. One is dry, kept dry or almost a little bit damp for lifting, and the other one is being used to put paint in. I'm just going to give this a couple of minutes to dry. I'm going to put a little more looking for some areas where I can put some color that aren't too wet. So I'm moving around the painting as I often do, looking for some places where I can put color while other places are drying out a little bit. Sometimes we don't want them to dry out completely, we just want them to dry out enough so that we can add more color there without the color being lost in water. There. Now I'm going to take a little bit of violet and mix it with one of the reds so that up in this area here that is away from the light, I'm going to put in some violet in this area. And then blend it into as it moves into the light. Yeah, it's good to have some areas where the color is not so bright, where it's a little more either toward brown or blue or violet, a little less bright. So I'm just putting some water around that to blend it. There. I think I might want a little more of that violet also. Makes some sense to have some of that down here under these petals here. And over here. So just do a little bit of that. Not too much. I want to make a big shadow, just a little bit subtle. At the very end, when the painting is dry, we'll come in and do a few more defined shadows. But the idea with this now is to have it be, and then from this shadow, I want to put more bold color and let it diffuse into the more white. Part of the painting where the light is really hitting that petal. Okay, so it's a question of just looking carefully at the image and seeing where are the most dense shadows. I think in here, there would be some transitioning into that brighter pink. I'll put more of that pink in there. It blends up. And then the petal curves outward here. And then we have a little more let's see, where else? We have some, I think right in here. Now that's a little brighter red, but it's okay. I'll put a little more violet in it directly from the palette and then blend. And then just stretch that out with water. Okay. And dab it in the center there so I can make sure that my white areas stay preserved for the light to show. Okay. And a little tiny bit in here. Just a touch of negative painting around the petal above, creating a shadow in the area below. Okay. Okay. I'm going to take, that was a sort of brownish violet. And oh, I have to run out, so I'll come back. I have to go and lead a life drawing group. Be the monitor, and open the gallery. So I better get my coat on and get over there. But this is okay. This is a good start. It's hard to stop. I'm having trouble stopping. Okay, time to stop. Okay, well, I'm going to do a little bit more on this flower. Basically using exactly the same methods that I was using, but just putting some more color in. There's no hurry really, so it's nice to let it dry in between and see what one wants to do. So I see that I might want to put a little bit of an orange tone shadow in that area, and maybe a little more of a light pink in this area. So let me see. I'll mix up a little bit of an orange tone, put a little red in it so it deepens, but still try to do a little bit of an orange tone in this area. I like the idea of the shadows being, and then just a little plain orange in that same area. Dropping it in a little toward the light, so where it might be brighter. And as before, I'll use my paper towel, or you can use a Q-tip, or you can use a dry brush, a completely separate dry brush. I just want to clean the edges there so that it doesn't bleed into the petal in front. Yeah. So while this is loose, there is still some definition here and there. Yeah. And then on the outside, I'm just going to take a little damp clean brush and spread that color a little bit. I'll spread it into here a little bit too. Clean that edge there. There's a nice little definition of the petal there. So I'll keep that. And over here on this side, do the same thing, just with a damp brush, clean water. Spread that a little bit. And I'll even let a little bit of that go into the background to have what's called a loose edge. So there's some negative painting of the petals in front, and just carrying some of this. I'm just going to carry some of that color out. I won't do that with every one of them, but sometimes. And again, that kind of loosens the edge, and over here, I think I'll vary that and put some more of a pink in there. I think I use a little bit of rose madder in there. And then switch to a little bit of a slightly different but same family rose d'or. It has a little more texture in it, a little more granulation. It's like a good. And I managed to stay away from that rose in front, petal in front. So just carry that out a little bit. And then to intensify the shadow, just take that same rose d'or, but just use it in a little more concentrated way. The same, or rather that's a little more concentrated, less water. And spread that in there. A little more. Just so that it's varied. It's not all one concentration within the shadow. In some places it's a little more light, in some places a little more dark. So this is how I'm just gradually building up the flower. And using, in this case, it's a number 8 Talon mix, Taklon mix, goat hairs and synthetic. The synthetic does help me have a nice point, and it bounces. It bounces sort of as it comes back, whereas the sable, once when I bend it, it kind of stays bent. Whereas the synthetics just bounces right back to shape. This orange that I've put in is just a little bit too orange, so I'm going to drop a little bit of. I don't want both of them so orange, so in one of them I'm going to drop a little bit of the rose madder. Okay, because as I stand back and look at it, it's just a little too much. I'll put a little tiny bit of indication of the way the petal changes shape there, because it is nice, a nice shape. Okay. Over here, I think I'd like a little more shadow on this great big petal here. And I think I'll use a little bit of Quintandone magenta mixed in with some scarlet rose. Just get a slight variation of color. Let's see how that is. I mean, one wants to make the colors as close as possible, but to me, the slight variation does create some, and I can put a little bit of that over here on top of the violet that was there. And that deepens it a little bit, but it also creates some harmony with this shadow that's on this in the same area. Okay, so now I'll just spread that out a little bit. with water. Put a little water there, maybe a tiny bit of that will carry out here. Yep. So I'm trying to maintain looseness in the application of the paint and not get too precise. My tendency is to be more tight, and but this particular video is to illustrate ways to have the paint be very soft and very loose. I think for this morning I'll go into one more petal area over here, just putting water in this whole area. There are 2 petals there, and I'm just going to drop in a little of that same color. It had a little bit of quinacridone magenta in it, and combined with a little bit of scarlet and rose. So whatever reds and pinks, violets and oranges you have on your palette, you can work with. They'll have different names. But the key is to just try to find a little bit of contrast and also mix them so they're not so dark. You see, this is a very thin wash of those colors here, so you can just even barely tell that there's some violet in there. And I'm going to stretch that color out a little just in this direction here. That may all disappear when I come back and work the background later, but for now it's just a slight continuity of color that helps to loosen the edge, and I'm also softening in that area. The green that's there, the edge of the green that's there too while I'm working in that area. Okay. I'm looking at this and trying to decide where to go next, because I don't want to overdo it. I'm going to put some color here and here, and just soften the edge that way, rather than put down water, because now I'm getting into a tighter space. I am going to just put some water all around in this central part. It's got a little more of an orange tone in it. It's a little more intense, and I'm leaving this a bit loose. So I'm just dropping some color into here and not thinking about, oh, puppies. That's a little, one obviously has a toy that the other one would like to have. It's nice to be able to speak dog language, isn't it? So I'm going to put a little bit here also on this petal and just drop that one in. I'm not going to do any manipulation of it for now. I'm just dropping in some bits and pieces of color in some of these crevices. Because I'd like this to dry. I'd like this to be a little underworked and to dry, and then to come in a little later and see if I need something else. Now I'm putting down some water on this bigger petal here. And I think I'll carry forward with a little bit of that orange, but mixing with a little pink. And so it has something in common with these other two petals, but not too much. I don't want to overdo it on the accent of the orange. I like it there, here, and there, but I don't want to have it take over the painting. It's interesting when it's just in a few places. And I'll just put one more final place. I'm going to put it right in here. Don't ask me why. It just looks like a good place to put it for me, and a touch here. And I think I better leave the orange alone before I get carried away. Maybe a touch here. And I'll blend that out. Yeah, I kind of like that. So you just kind of make your decisions as you go along. There are no rules here. But I like the way the orange can make it pop a little bit. Now, in order to make it pop a little bit, on this side, I'm going to drop some of this Quinquedone magenta in here. I should have actually waited, because I can see that it's making a little bit of a bloom, so I have to blend. Because I don't want to ruin that petal. Okay. Hopefully that will not be too much water dropped into the petal, because then it would create a bloom. Okay. See, I'm just trying to minimize the potential for that. Okay, I think that it needs to dry a little bit right now. And this one here is a little bit too brownish. I know it's because of the color that I used for the violet, which was a brownish tone violet. I think I need to go and get a softer tone now and go over that a little bit. Let's see which one I'm going to use. I'll find one that's not so brown. And that one's too brown. I'm mixing a little bit of red into the violet here. I need to still too brown. Yeah. Still trying to find the right shade. No, I'm having trouble. I know what I'll do. I'll glaze over it with a very bright pink. Instead of looking for another violet. That will do it. A very, very bright pink is the opera pink, one of the brightest pinks available. It's almost neon, but that very bright pink just suddenly perked up that shadow over there. I think you can see what I mean. It's hard for the camera to see the color exactly as I am seeing it. Okay, and off in this corner there's a shadow behind this petal here. A little bit. And I'm going to lose the edge over here as if we don't know where the edge is on the top petal. And the same here, I'm going to lose it, just minimal edge. Okay. So so that that petal's not so big, but we don't know exactly where it ends and begins. Yeah, that's exactly the way I want that. And then while we're at that, drop a little bit of color in over here. Oops, now my water's getting dirty. I'll drop a little bit of, that was my brush that was dirty. Drop a little bit of color over there. I think I'll just use a straight rose door. And then wipe the color, lift some of it away from there. And I'm going to drop in a little bit more scarlet. Too bright, too bright. Just wipe a little bit of it away. I wipe my brush and then I wipe a little bit of color away. I just use a paper towel when I want to do that until I get the amount of color in there that I want. Add a little bit more. There's a little bit of a crevice there that I just want to emphasize, but not too much. And there's a little bit of one over here too, but not too much. Just a little bit. Okay. That's about all we can do at this point until this dries. I mean, we could keep working, but I like to let it dry, and because the paper is also buckling a bit. I don't know if you can see that, but it's buckling here, it's buckling here, because wherever it's wet, it kind of rises up, and as it dries, it flattens again. So we'll give it a chance to do that. Hi. Well, this is pretty close to drying, and I thought what I would do next is put a little bit of color in the background. This is the top of the painting. It's a little more yellowish green. This is the bottom of the painting here, and I'm going to put a little bit of water on it. Not reaching the rose. I don't want it to reach the rose. And I'm going to take some very intense greens. I'm going to mix together some dark greens and dark blues on my palette. I mean, it doesn't matter which ones, it's really up to you. Until I get a nice rich green. And I'm going to drop that in some bit of leaf shapes. Not quite leaf shapes, but I'm going to leave some of the underlying pattern because it is quite lovely. But I want to have some value contrast with the rose and in the painting. So I'm just putting in the beginning of some of that. And some of the pattern is going to still show through. I spilled a little bit of color there, which I definitely don't want to do. And of course my brush was dirty. So, but if I pick it up quickly enough, it's okay. And I'm just going to soften these edges here with the brush, but carry a little bit of this color through. I'm using a Kolinsky sable for this, but it's kind of flicking some color in here and there where I don't necessarily want it. And I can, when I use my paper towel to dry, then I'm going to take just some blue, very, very dark Payne's gray blue, and mix with some ultramarine blue and put some blue in this mixture to get the level of contrast that I really want here against the petals in the back. I'm taking a bit of a risk. Because this is very dark, but I think that this is the shadow side of the rose. The light side is coming from here. So I want to really accentuate the shadow behind the rose. And then just carry that color a little bit up here and blend it in. And then I use like ultramarine blue, which granulates nicely with a little bit of Payne's gray. And I'm putting some of that down in this area too. You can see some of the pattern below is still showing, which is nice. It's what I want. I'm going to put a little more here and there. That brush is a little too soft. I have to take another one. In this area here, I'm going to put just a little bit of that shadow, where there's a separation between the petals here. And accentuate some of the shape of the petals here. Not too much. I have to be careful not to overdo my detail. It's always a risk. But I'll loosen the edge a little bit. I carry a little tiny bit of that color washed out into this area here. Just to take a little bit of the color, blend it in. And then soften that edge there. Just blend it in a little bit. And over here, carry the darkness out a little bit here. But not in a firm line, just here and there. Again, I want this soft here. I don't want a hard edge there. Don't want any hard edges here. Okay. I think we're starting to get a little bit of value contrast between the green and the dark blue. I'll put a little bit here where it's washing out here. Bring some color in there. But not overdo it. Okay. Got a little bit of a there. I just want to see how that dries. I'm not going to work on the whole painting right now, the whole background. because I want to see how that dries and make sure I don't overdo the background. I might want to just leave the rest of it with only a light wash over it, light glaze over it. Just putting in a little tiny bit. I'm just carrying forward this shadow just a little tiny bit, because while the color is there, and in order to blend, so there's no edge here. Just blend into this zone here with the slightest amount of dirtied water, basically. Very subtle. Just a little dirty water on my brush with that blue, very carrying it forward so that it's blended. And then down here, darkening a little bit more toward the base of the paper and this corner here. And then just blending it out so that it's not more than just a subtle change. Okay, I think that's a good start on the background. So we can see, I'm just going to carefully, as I always do, dry along the tape so that this wet water that's pooling by the tape does not get pulled back into the painting. Then make a mark. This is a little bit of edge underneath showing. I have to fix that. It's the tiniest amount of distraction, but I don't want any distractions up here in an important part of the petal. So I'm just putting some dots of color in there so that there's not anything that's going to be a distraction. And over here, while this is wet, there's a little bit of a distraction here I'm seeing as it dries. So I need the edge of the flower to start to show, but I'm just using some kind of dirty water on my brush to do that rather than bringing in fresh, heavy paint, just to kind of bring in from the surrounding area. And some edge, a little bit, to just make it look like there's that wonderful kind of curly edge that sometimes happens on the rose and can get carried in here a little bit. I'm putting in more little marks on the edge than are in the photograph, just because I love it when flowers do that, and they kind of wrinkle up a little bit on the edge and create the opportunity for some very nice shadows and marks. There's a little mark here that's drying, and I don't want that. Yeah, another one here, a little uneven drying. So just try to get that blended in so that doesn't make, here's a little uneven drawing. You know, it's good to watch it as it's happening and make some corrections at that time. This is a little uneven drawing here. It's happening because of the paper buckling a little as it dries. Here's a little bit of unevenness here too that I don't really, if it's, you know, sometimes it's good and it looks good, but when it's a little too strong, I don't want it to be a distraction. So I might just put a little more color in there. just dot it in. Put it on my brush and just dot it in. Okay. Yeah. I think we're moving along nicely. This is a little hard edge here. Soften it while it's still damp. Okay. Just soften that hard edge a little bit there. Yeah. Okay, we'll let this dry a little bit and come back to it. Well, I think that we had a very positive result from the way that this has dried. We can see the pattern below, which gives it a very nice, and over here where the light coat was put, it's very, very nice. And also here, where it was a thinner layer of color, I like that. So I'm just going to, didn't want to take the chance of ruining the painting by not knowing how it would dry and whether the top coat of wet paint would totally dissolve the underlying wet paint so that there was no pattern left. So what I'm going to do now is I want a little more color in this area here, but I don't want it as dark as it was over here. So I'll carry forward just some of that ultramarine blue without so much of the darker blue. And I'll just drop in some color and lightly blend that in to the rest. Okay, so I think that's probably enough paint for that area because we can still see quite a nice level of patterning below. Over here I want to do the same thing. I'm just going to go to the outer part of this with a wet wash. And I think this time I'll take a very transparent blue, which is a cobalt blue, rather than the manganese blue, which is fairly transparent, but it also granulates. So I'm going to take the cobalt blue and just drop that color in to that water that I just applied. And in some places I'll drop it in so it's a little more intense, and in other places a little less intense. I don't want too much because I like the fact that the light is coming a little bit from, of course, from the top, as it always does from the sun and the upper reaches, but it's coming from this side here, so essentially from this corner area. So I want that corner area to be the lightest in order to be consistent with the shadowing in the rows. And I think I don't want to really cover these glowing areas. I'm just going to leave them. I think they add a nice effect to the painting, and so we'll leave them just as they are. In fact, I'm going to take my scrub brush, which is just a very stiff bristled brush, and scrub out a little lost edge on this petal, as if the light is just so bright that it is creating a lost edge here. So I'm going to leave that like that. Go back in with just a little bit of color on the margin here. Okay. Now we're at the last little bit, which is that central area that I wanted to really let dry and have a little more sense of before adding some additional detail, because that's an area where if we overdo the detail there, it could kind of ruin things in what is otherwise a very loose painting. So I'm going to put some shadow in there where that curves in the center around where the flower was opening. But then I'm going to blend that so it's not such a stiff, defined area. Because this area I want to have some definition, but not to take it to the point where it's too much. There is a shape where that central area is coming out, and a lot of petals are all joined and coming out together and gradually opening up. But that center area isn't really opened up yet. So I want to indicate it, but not with too dark a shadow. At the base of that on the other side, there is some shadow here that we can show without it being too much, I think. So I'm handling this part very, very carefully. I see that it's drying light, and I can drop in just a little more color here. I don't want to overdo it. And then over here where it's opening, just a little more color here. Where that petal is opening. So it just gives a sense of that. And then as I look at the original flower, I think maybe just a little bit in here. Deepening that just a bit. And then I'm choosing different pinks and every time I go in, slightly different pinks and different oranges. I'm going to put a little bit behind here to accentuate the shape of that. And there's actually a petal that is coming out here and has started to open from the center. So that will help to define what is happening there in that central area. It's all a question of trying to think of what is going on with this particular thing, whether it's an animal or a plant or a tree, a flower, and trying to give a sense of where it's at in its lifetime. Now this area here is just a little too pale, I think. So I'm just going to put in the slightest glaze of light pink there. And then drop in a little more. watercolor just to not completely cover the area I just did, but just drop in a little color. A tiny bit of the same orange down here, but not next to the other orange, to carry that orange into the painting without it being too obvious. Okay, maybe a little touch right here, the same color. Again, just a little touch. Sometimes it's the slightest amount that can make a difference. I think you can see that very tiny amount in this corner is helping too. I'll put a little tiny bit right here. Just a little glaze over the pink. Okay, I wanted you to see this rose in the upright position. Because I want you to see that while the rose is pretty close to being done, maybe done except for a little tweaking. The top and the side are pretty much the way I want them to be. But I think to have the rose be sitting in the garden and not floating in midair, I'm going to have to do some final steps of bringing the rose down into the background a little bit. And the way that I'm going to do that is to mix a very dark green with a very, very black Payne's gray blue hue, and literally pull that flower down into the painting a bit by putting shadow on the side away from the light. Because having the glow and light on the shadow side is taking away from the ability of the flower to sit in the garden. I think you can see what I mean. I may even slightly indicate, just briefly, may indicate a sense of stem and leaf here and there. But I'm going to just do that little bit of work to finish this painting. By pulling it down in that way. It doesn't have to be very precise, just here and there, but I'm going to put dark color, blues and dark greens on this side of the flower in a rough way, and try to bring that down into, so it's not floating up in the air. Because I really do love the glow of the painting, and I love the glow on the left side, but to have it be all the way around the flower is disconcerting. So let's bring my water dish down here where I can reach it better, and bring some of these blues and greens in. Not everywhere, but just enough to give a sense that that the flower is connected somehow to something and not floating up in the air. brush for that. So these are dark, very dark blackish blues and very dark greens that I'm hoping will just pull that down. And like I said, I made a slight impression of a stem and some leaves, but I don't need to do more than just create an impression of that, because to put them in too detailed a manner would take away from the overall structure of the painting as a loose work. So I'll take a little bit of this and carry it forward lightly. I'm just trying to pull that in, and I think that's working. What do you think? So this is a kind of thing that, once I turned it around and I looked at it straight in the way that it's supposed to be, I had it to the side so that I could fill the camera screen and you could see that work a little better. So I'm just blending in here. I'm leaving a few little empty spaces here and there so that there's some discontinuity, and it can match up a little bit with what one finds in the other parts of the background. I think that's probably close to where I need to be. Maybe a little bit more right here. Don't want too much, just a little bit, and a little bit down here. Yeah, I think that works a little bit better. That small amount of indication of a stem is helpful. Not too much, just a small amount. And then I'll just take a dry brush and lift a little color out of there in the center of the stem. I'm just trying to pull some color out with my brush. Without adding any water, just using the dry brush to pull out some of the paint. It's called lifting. Watercolorists do it all the time. They do lifting. I need to do a little more. I need a little more lifting here. A little more lifting. You just take a dry brush or a Q-tip if you want. Anything that's dry. A little piece of paper towel. But you want to just lift some wet color out. And then on these other areas, I just want to paint around that lifted area. just emphasizing the dark so that it feels like the rose is not floating. Just in some places, not everywhere. And I'll have to blend it in a little bit. Making some marks so that there's some indication there's something going on here. And you know, because in a garden there would be a lot of marks and lines. We can put a few marks in. Because we already have the light marks from the pattern that we put in at the beginning. So we can put a few dark marks in here above. Sometimes you can just use your finger to blend. Yeah, I think that's starting to work a little bit better. It's always good to look at the picture. Sometimes we even turn a picture upside down and look at it upside down in order to see that it's really balanced and nothing is off. But it was starting to dry and I turned it around and I noticed that it really this area here needs a little bit of depth in it. And I'll put some marks, as I mentioned, a few marks here and there. That will somehow try to give some meaning to other marks that are there, so that you feel like this flower is in an area where there's a lot going on. There is pattern and there's things happening. A different kind of blue. Again, just to give the sense of diversity going on. I don't want to overdo it because there's the light coming from above. And so we still want a sense of it getting lighter as it comes to the upper reaches. But okay, I think that's a little bit better in terms of coming close to being done. I know I thought it was almost done when I looked at it before, but and then realized it wasn't. So okay, so I hope that makes a little more sense, added a little tidbit. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate your time and involvement with my little teaching process. Thanks.